the Thalor cruiser. Vision of Purity drifted like a polished dagger over the stratosphere of Solaria, its stealth plating shimmering faintly against the planetary magnetic field, as if smugness had a texture. Inside, Captain Vulek stood before a panoramic observation pane, hands clasped rigidly behind his back, a textbook posture of imperial disinterest. Another carbon-water biosphere, local designation, Solaria, primitive tech, scattershot emissions, no visible orbital infrastructure, he intoned. His science officer nodded dutifully, while a trio of data scribes recorded useless metrics for a planet they assumed wouldn't matter. Dr. Marin Kale, the only human aboard and technically part of the diplomatic observation exchange program, sipped something suspiciously similar to Terran coffee and muttered, "Ah, yes, the old primitive and harmless mistake. We really should patent that." No one laughed. No one ever laughed on a Thalor bridge. The crew's monotony shattered when the encrypted command channel crackled to life with a voice no one had authorized. Calm, female, fluent in the imperial dialect, but wrapped in the kind of ease that came from knowing exactly how much trouble you weren't in. "Good evening, Captain Vulek. I believe your cloak failed to account for atmospheric lensing distortion. Nice try, though. Next time maybe drift behind the sun." The Thalor officers froze, blinking in various shades of disbelief. "And don't worry," the voice continued smoothly. "We waited to say hello until you'd finished sneaking. Seemed polite." Vulek's mandibles clicked audibly in a rare loss of decorum. "Who is this?" he snapped. The image on the comm display shifted to reveal Admiral Lyra Wren, composed, unimpressed, leaning slightly forward in a black and crimson Solarian command uniform that didn't need medals to look dangerous. She looked straight into their bridge, as though she'd been there the whole time. "Lyra Wren," she said, "Admiral of the Solarian Unified Defense Command. And before you check your logs, yes, I'm real. You've been under observation since your entry vector breached our exo-satellite web 4 hours ago." Dr. Kale coughed delicately. "If I had popcorn, I'd be having a religious experience right now," he whispered, conveniently close, enough for the translation matrix to broadcast him across the bridge. Vulek spun toward him with narrowed eyes, but Wren continued as if narrating a weather report. "Your vessel's ID transponder pings at 9.3 cycles. That's cute. We've been able to decrypt that frequency since the 2040s. Oh, and tell your engineering crew they left a hull stabilization node flickering during orbit insertion. Honestly, it's like you want to be noticed." A murmur of low-level panic flitted among the Thalor crew like birds realizing they were in a cat's garden. Vulek's nostrils flared. "You have no authority to access this channel. This is a secure Imperial frequency." "Captain," Wren cut in, tilting her head like someone adjusting the volume on her amusement. "Your secure frequency is currently being routed through a Solarian relay disguised as a mining buoy. We've been feeding you atmospheric telemetry for 6 minutes. You're welcome." She leaned back. "Now, would you like to land, or do you need more time to pretend we don't see you?" The silence on the Vision of Purity was absolute. Even the internal comm chimes seemed to pause, like the ship itself was waiting for someone to say, "Plot twist." Dr. Kale, for his part, strolled casually toward the viewing screen, sipping his drink with one hand and subtly disabling the internal recorders with the other. "I did mention Earth wasn't quite the open book you thought it was," he offered. Helpfully. "Though to be fair, you were distracted by those charming swamp transmissions from 1997. I believe one of your cultural analysts thought Baywatch was our emergency beacon." Captain Vulek stood very still. For a being born into the most stable empire the galaxy had ever known, whose every protocol had taught him that dominance came from age and order, this was something new. Not chaos, not even hostility, just calm. Practiced superiority wrapped in a smile and broadcast from a world that wasn't even supposed to know his ship existed. "Prepare a landing shuttle," he finally said, his voice tight. "We'll see if this Admiral Wren is as clever in person as she pretends to be." "Oh, she's worse," Dr. Kale said, smiling faintly. "You have no idea how bad your day is about to get." Then, almost as an afterthought, he muttered into his wrist implant. "Initiate Mirage passive sync lock. Confirm Solarian contact stage 1 complete." Somewhere on the shadowed side of the planet, cloaked megastructures began to stir. The E shuttle touched down on Solaria's surface with all the grace of a reluctant apology, kicking up dust across what appeared to be an empty plateau. Vulik expected ruins, dirt roads, perhaps even a ceremonial drum circle to mark the arrival of a superior species. Instead, as the dust settled, a city unfolded like a blooming machine. Towers shimmered into view, not rising from the ground, but revealing themselves through phased cloaking, sleek, obsidian arcs of metal and light arching toward the sky, humming with power, as if someone had skinned the stars and draped them across architectural bones. Ren waited at the base of a curved transit platform, flanked not by soldiers but by silent, sentient drones, their bodies matte black and softly pulsing with internal code. No weapons visible, just the quiet implication that if Solaria had wanted to erase the shuttle mid-descent, it would have done so with the elegance of a whisper. Vulik descended slowly, adjusting his regal shoulder plates as if ceremony might still save the moment. "Welcome to New Avalon," Ren said, without offering a hand. "Our capital, or at least the visible one. We have 4 others you probably didn't scan, unless your sensors can see through layered quantum misdirection. They can't, by the way. We checked." Behind her, an AI-directed maglev pod hissed to a halt, and with a subtle flick of her wrist, she gestured Vulik and his aides inside. "Don't worry, it won't kill you. That would be impolite on a first visit." The ride was silent, save for the muted hum of inertia dampeners and the uncomfortable realization that nothing in the city moved without purpose. Every drone, every building adjustment, every holographic overlay was calibrated, observing, measuring. The city itself seemed to breathe, not with life but with surveillance. The pod docked at a sky bridge ringed with layered hollow panels. At its center stood a display, real-time feeds of every Thaler fleet movement in the sector. Vulik's jaw tensed. "You're violating ascendancy monitoring boundaries," Ren raised an eyebrow. "No, we're updating the parts of your logs that were inaccurate. Your 4th fleet near Nuvaris has a plasma containment leak, by the way. You should look into that before someone loses half a cruiser." Before he could respond, the holopanel shifted, displaying not just the fleet, but deep structural blueprints, Thaler hull designs, power regulation maps, even crew manifest algorithms. Vulik's heart nearly stopped. "How did you—" 2019, Ren interrupted, walking around the console like a patient teacher. "One of your deep beacons broke orbit, crashed into our Pacific Ocean. We pulled it from the Mariana Trench before your emergency probe even got halfway across the quadrant. And then, we read." She tapped the console, and a new display unfurled, Solaria's own fleet hovering just behind the moon, each vessel veiled under Mirage systems, each pulse signature unmistakably Thalor. No, modified Thalor. Better heat dispersion, improved shielding, streamlined power efficiency. Vulik staggered a step. "This is theft." Ren's smile was faint. "No, Captain, this is inheritance. You left your diary under our bed." "And we decided to study the family tree." Her tone sharpened, barely. "While you were categorizing our broadcasts as inconsequential, we were cataloging your strategies, decrypting your language trees, mapping your empire's supply routes. You see a backwater. We see a blind empire that hasn't updated its security protocols in 87 years. She stepped closer, and the city behind her seemed to lean in as well, like gravity itself bent around her confidence. "And as for our primitive civilization?" The sky behind the transparent dome flickered, and a Solarian dreadnought phased into orbit, its cloak shedding like smoke, revealing a vessel larger than anything in the Thalor registry, covered in kinetic repulsors, pulse lances, and a spinal mount mass accelerator glowing with planetary core energy. "We've been waiting to be underestimated," Ren said softly. "It makes the reveal so much more satisfying." Vulek said nothing. Not out of deference. His mind simply couldn't arrange words into an appropriate reaction. Even his aides had taken a half-step behind him. Dr. Kale appeared from a side corridor, holding what looked suspiciously like a Solarian tablet and sipping what looked even more suspiciously like another cup of Earth coffee. "I would apologize," he said to Vulek, "but this really was the best way to do it. You know how humans are with dramatic timing. We love an audience." Vulek's voice cracked finally. "This is an act of aggression." "No," Ren replied coolly. "This is an act of announcement." She walked past him, toward a rising platform. "Now, you're going to report back to your council, and you're going to tell them that Solaria requests full diplomatic induction into the Thalor Ascendancy." She paused. "With conditions. You'll find the terms on this." She handed him a chip no larger than a fingernail. "You may want to read it in private. Clause 16 is a bit of a shocker, especially the footnote." Vulek stared at the chip as if it might bite him. "And if we say no?" Ren didn't even turn. "Then we assume you're comfortable continuing the galactic conversation with your encryption protocol set to 1983. A Solarian drone opened the exit gate, as if it too were dismissing him. Kale gave a sympathetic shrug. Could have been worse. She almost activated Clause 17. Vulek turned with visible effort. "What's Clause 17? Kale smiled. She stops being polite. "The Thaler Council chambers aboard. The orbiting diplomatic flagship Eminence of Order were a cathedral of polished obsidian and ritualized hierarchy, every line designed to remind visitors of who held dominion." Yet, as Captain Vulek stood at the center of the council dais, presenting the data chip Admiral Ren had handed him, the room's usual atmosphere of smug certainty had eroded into something far more brittle. Hesitation. The holographic feed of the contract floated mid-air, its language clinically precise, riddled with sub-clauses that made the Ascendancy look less like the galactic shepherds they imagined themselves to be, and more like bureaucratic relics about to be audited by the future. "Clause 16, murmured Arbiter Senyol from his elevated platform, voice measured, "proposes that Solaria be granted immediate sovereignty over its off-world colonies, of which, according to this, they already possess 8. He turned his slit-pupiled eyes toward Vulek. "And you verified this?" Vulek nodded stiffly, still recovering from the humiliating tour. "One of them is currently orbiting the gas giant Threxos 4 under phased concealment. Our probes passed within 10 kilometers and never registered it. Solaria calls it Quiet Dagger." There was a long silence before a junior counselor muttered, "What else did we miss?" Vulek hesitated, then answered with the exact tone of a man forced to respect the ambush that ruined him. "Everything." Back on Solaria, Ren stood in a glass-floored observatory above the Equatorial Defense Command. Around her, consoles displayed. The Ascendancy's reaction feeds in real time, flickers of strategy recalculations, fleet redeployments masked as exercises, and diplomatic queries wrapped in passive-aggressive language. All expected, all irrelevant. Solaria didn't need galactic approval. It needed a seat at the table so it could start flipping over the pieces. "Let them stew," Ren said to her staff. "We've already penetrated 5 of their deep archives. Their version of deliberation is mostly stalling while trying to delete their worst mistakes." Her aide nodded. "They're requesting a formal summit, face-to-face, with you, not a representative." Ren's lips twitched. "Of course. They are. Now they realize the polite human might be holding a lit match under their policy scrolls." She turned to the central holo display and brought up the next phase of her operation, Project Vigilance. As the orbital screen shimmered to reveal the concealed array of antimatter lances embedded in Solaria's outer mining network, she allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction. Each lance was disguised as a civilian infrastructure node, the kind of installation even an ascendancy fleet would ignore. But once activated, they could vaporize entire battalions at planetary distance. "We built them under regulations that forbid militarizing orbital space," Wren said, half to herself. "So we built them inside our paperwork instead." By the time Vulek returned to the planet for the summit, this time with full diplomatic honors and a delegation of translators, legal archivists, and a cultural analysis drone, he was noticeably paler. Solaria's reception was brief and to the point. No parades, no fake humility. Just a glass conference hall suspended above an oceanic thermal generator, its ceiling an open projection of the stars above, subtly reminding the ascendancy what space actually looked like from Solaria's point of view, open, mapped, and already theirs. Wren was waiting at the far end of the table, not standing behind any podium or security shield, just watching them as if she'd been expecting this her entire life, which, in truth, she had. "Before we begin," she said, cutting through the ceremonial opening protocols like they were dried leaves, "I want to clarify one thing. This isn't a request. It's an offering, a contract. You can accept our entry terms, or we can continue building our own order without you. Either way, we move forward." The translator drone hesitated before speaking, clearly not used to delivering ultimatums wrapped in smiles. One of the counselors, attempting to recover some control, leaned forward. "If Solaria is so prepared, why come to us at all?" Wren blinked, then answered without a pause. "Because unity is more efficient than conquest, and frankly, we'd rather not be interrupted when the real problem arrives." The table went still. "What problem?" another asked, almost too quickly. Wren tapped her wrist display. The entire chamber darkened as the room filled with a slow, ticking rhythm, a gravitational oscillation signature. Projected above the table, a simulation unfolded. A quasar fragment, ejected from a collapsing singularity at impossible speeds, set on a trajectory that would intersect 3 inhabited systems within 60 years. The data was clear, grim, and undeniable. "You don't see it because your long-range sensors are based on tachyon ripple. Ours are neutrino mesh hybrid arrays. We saw it decades ago." She let that settle before continuing. "You have the infrastructure. We have the foresight. If we combine forces, we can build an array large enough to deflect the wave. If not, we survive alone. You might not." A silence followed, not of fear, but of realization. Solaria wasn't asking for power. It already had it. Solaria was offering to share the future, but only if the galaxy stopped pretending it owned it. Vulek slowly sat down, all bravado drained. "And if we decline the terms?" Wren didn't move. "Then I'll write the warning letter to your successors. Myself, on real paper for the poetry." They delayed for 3 days, not out of strategy, not out of principle, but out of ancient habit, the same ceremonial paralysis that had kept the Thalor ascendancy stagnant for centuries. 3 days of half-meetings, hollow objections, and internal memos bouncing through a system more obsessed with optics than outcomes. But Wren didn't blink. She gave no concessions, no dramatic speeches, no further warnings. She simply waited, overseeing her command center while Solaria's invisible systems continued pulsing across the galactic net. On the final morning, as the Thalor delegation prepared their last-ditch protocol stall, a ripple surged across their internal fleet communications, unauthorized uplinks, real-time syncing, and a synchronized override request from dozens of ships across multiple sectors. Their own warships had begun responding to Solarian command codes. That was the last message needed. Arbiter Senyol sent the final signal to Wren's office via the old diplomatic channel, a simple glyph meaning compliance granted. And just like that, the galaxy pivoted, not with a bang, not with war drums, but with a single digital signature on a contract they hadn't written. Wren read the glyph with mild amusement. "Took them long enough," she murmured, before forwarding. The acceptance package to Mirage Command for full activation. Across the stars, Solarian systems that had operated quietly in the background rose to full authority. Phantom satellites stopped pretending to be clouds. Orbital defense lances switched from passive scan to warm-ready mode. Lunar outposts lit up with synchronized transponder codes previously blocked from ascendancy registries. The mask was gone. Solaria had arrived. Later that evening, aboard the Thaler flagship Eminence of Order, Admiral Wren stepped onto the primary council floor for the ratification ceremony. She wore no ceremonial garb, just her sharp black command uniform with the red Solarian insignia over her heart. The council chamber was quieter than usual, the air heavier. Vulik was present, but standing to the side, no longer the imposing figure of introduction. His expression was one of someone who'd met a mirror they hadn't expected to recognize. Senyol addressed the gathering formally, but his voice lacked its usual iron. By decree of the Ascendancy Council and with mutual recognition protocols confirmed, Solaria is hereby inducted into the Thalor Accord as a sovereign galactic power with full strategic, diplomatic, and colonial rights. Wren nodded once. "And you've read all 37 clauses?" she asked politely. Senyol inclined his head. "We have. Including the part where your interstellar encryption standards are now subject to Solarian revision?" "Yes." "And the clause authorizing co-leadership status in regional council zones?" A longer pause. "Yes." Wren stepped forward and handed over the revised council crest, a stylized Solarian Aeon star entwined with the Thalor triband. It clicked magnetically into place on the dais. The room dimmed, lights shifting to a neutral harmony between Thalor, blue, and Solarian red. And just like that, the universe changed its center of gravity. After the formalities, Wren stood on the viewing deck alone, watching the distant quasar ripple on the holomap, the same threat that had unified centuries of deception into one sharp reveal. Kale approached quietly beside her, sipping, of course, another cup of suspiciously good coffee for a ship that didn't stock human blends. "Think they know what just happened?" he asked. Wren didn't take her eyes off the stars. "They will. Eventually. Probably when they realize our AI systems have already begun optimizing their logistics protocols." She exhaled slowly, the tension of decades finally receding. "We were never the barbarians outside the gate, Marin. We were the locksmiths inside the wall." He grinned, and the door just swung open. Behind them, systems buzzed quietly, ascendancy fleets syncing with Solarian networks, shared. Databases linking star charts, defense grids rerouted through Solarian efficiency hubs. Somewhere deep within ascendancy territory, an old admiral stared in confusion at a status update. Incoming fleet diagnostic approved by Solarian oversight node. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he would. Soon. And as Wren looked out at the stars, no longer distant, no longer denied, she gave a final quiet thought to the past, to Earth, to the shadow years, to the training drills buried in caves, to cloaked satellites orbiting dead moons, to decades of being forgotten on purpose. "Let them rewrite their history," she murmured. "We already wrote ours in advance." The universe wasn't prepared for humanity, but that was always the plan. Solaria didn't ask to be included. It simply waited until inclusion was irrelevant. And as the galaxy realigned its balance around the silent storm that had always been watching, always preparing, Admiral Wren smiled faintly and whispered into the stars, "We're not here to impress. We're here to correct."